21:40 hours, April 25th, 2026. The secure perimeter outside the Washington Hilton. The sharp crack of high-velocity gunfire shatters the spring evening. 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen pulls the trigger. This was not a random act of violence. This was a targeted strike at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The target was the President of the United States. Allen carried a manifesto calling himself the friendly federal assassin. He bypassed multiple rings of Secret Service security protocols. How did a lone gunman breach one of the most heavily fortified perimeters in the American capital? That is the question tearing the nation apart right now. But look closer at the numbers. 8 million angry citizens marching in the streets. 3,300 coordinated protest events nationwide. 11 years of escalating political hatred boiling over into a single night of violence. The American Republic is not just divided. It is fracturing under the weight of an unprecedented institutional crisis. For every dollar spent on domestic security, foreign adversaries are spending 10 to exploit this exact chaos. You are watching the controlled demolition of national stability. But here is what the mainstream networks refuse to tell you. The bullet that missed Donald Trump did not just graze a political campaign. It triggered a catastrophic chain reaction inside the Pentagon. Just days before the shooting, the liberal media establishment crossed a dangerous red line. Late-night host Jimmy Kimmel broadcasted a joke stating First Lady Melania Trump had a glow like an expectant widow. It was not just poor taste. In the lethal ecosystem of Washington politics, it was a signal. It legitimized the unthinkable. President Trump and Melania immediately demanded that the network fire Kimmel. They declared total war on corporate media. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stepped to the podium on April 28th. She did not mince words. She blamed the assassination attempt directly on political opponents. She stated that over a decade of hateful and constant rhetoric had weaponized the American public. Think about that for a second. The executive branch of the United States government is openly declaring that the media is complicit in an assassination plot. This is not political theater. This is the prologue to a constitutional collapse. What they did not know was that the real crisis was unfolding inside the military command structure. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth watched the domestic chaos and made a ruthless calculation. The Pentagon went into total lockdown. Under his direct orders, the Department of Defense enforced draconian new press restrictions. Reporters were suddenly banned from unescorted access inside the building. Journalists were forced to sign pledges. They had to swear not to report unauthorized, unclassified information. Run the numbers with me. 23,000 military and civilian personnel work inside the Pentagon. They manage an $850 billion defense budget. They control 11 nuclear aircraft carriers and 5,000 strategic warheads. And suddenly, a wall of absolute silence descends around them. Why? What is the Department of Defense hiding from the American people? The answer lies 6,000 miles away in the Persian Gulf. And that was the moment everything changed. On Easter Sunday, President Trump posted a message on social media that sent shockwaves through the global intelligence community. He proposed a direct and devastating bombing campaign against Iran. Not military bases, not missile silos, civilian infrastructure. He wanted to cripple the Iranian state. The blowback was instantaneous, but it did not come from the political left. It came from the heart of the MAGA movement. A massive and unprecedented fracture split the Republican base wide open. Prominent conservative figures turned against the commander-in-chief. Tucker Carlson went on the offensive. Blackwater founder Eric Prince condemned the strategy. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene publicly warned that a Middle East war betrays every single America First campaign promise. They looked at the butcher bill and recoiled. 800 Iranian casualties, But more importantly, 6 American service members dead, 6 flag-draped transfer cases arriving at Dover Air Force Base. Global energy markets panicked, oil prices surged, domestic energy costs skyrocketed overnight. The American taxpayer was bleeding at the pump while American blood was spilling in the desert. This was not the plan. This was a bankrupt strategy. No nation on earth can afford to win that way. But here is the terrifying reality. The domestic crackdown was only just beginning. While the Pentagon locked out the press, the State Department activated a terrifying new weapon: artificial intelligence. On April 16th, a classified program was exposed. The State Department utilized advanced artificial intelligence to monitor the social media accounts of international students. They called it a catch and revoke program. If a student expressed political nonconformity, the artificial intelligence flagged them. Their visas were instantly denied or revoked. Imagine the scale of this operation. Millions of data points processed every single second. A digital dragnet designed to crush dissent before it even materializes. It is a level of surveillance that rivals the Chinese Communist Party. And it was happening right here on American soil. But look closer at the timing. Why deploy this artificial intelligence weapon now? Because the administration knew the protests were going to escalate. The March 28th, No King's protests were just a rehearsal. Organizers estimated that 8 to 9 million participants flooded the streets. They coordinated across 3,300 separate events nationwide. Entire city blocks were paralyzed. Federal buildings were surrounded. The sheer mass of humanity overwhelmed local law enforcement. And right in the middle of this domestic siege, the Department of Justice imploded. On April 22nd, internal turmoil ripped through the Department of Justice. Pam Bondi was abruptly fired. A massive federal case was suddenly dropped. The administration polling numbers were in free fall. The justice system was being weaponized, dismantled, and reassembled in real time. This was not a simple administrative shakeup. This was a desperate purge. But what nobody tells you is how vulnerable this makes the United States on the global stage. Let us connect the dots. An assassination attempt against the president. A total war between the White House and the media. The Pentagon locked down and operating in secret. The Department of Justice in chaos. A massive fracture within the ruling political base. And 9 million angry citizens protesting in the streets. Beijing is watching. Moscow is taking notes. Tehran is calculating its next move. When the American homeland is consumed by civil conflict, the American military cannot project power abroad. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group requires a stable logistical chain to operate in the Indo-Pacific. It requires a unified command structure. But how can the Pentagon manage a two-front war against China and Iran when the commander-in-chief is fighting a civil war against his own media and his own political base? The answer is simple. They cannot. On April 17th, a fragile 10-day Middle East truce was declared. It was supposed to halt the violence. It was supposed to buy time. But the ceasefire was repeatedly breached. Rockets kept flying. Drones kept hunting. President Trump announced a 3-week extension following tense negotiations in Washington, but the damage was already done. Our enemies watched the MAGA revolt. They saw the American right wing cannibalizing its own leadership. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps realized they did not need to defeat the United States Navy in a pitched battle. They just needed to wait for Washington to destroy itself. Each Standard Missile-6 interceptor fired in the region costs $4,300,000. Each Iranian drone costs $20,000. For every dollar the enemy spends, American taxpayers spend $215 to defend. That is a mathematical death spiral. You cannot win a war of attrition when your own citizens are burning down the political establishment at home. The elite censorship scandal is not just about Jimmy Kimmel or a bad joke. It is about control. The administration is terrified of losing the narrative. That is why the Pentagon banned unescorted reporters. That is why the State Department unleashed artificial intelligence algorithms on college students. They are trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship. But the fracture in the MAGA base proves that the old political rules no longer apply. When Tucker Carlson and Eric Prince turn against a Republican president over foreign policy, you know the tectonic plates of American politics have shifted. The America First doctrine was supposed to keep the nation out of endless wars. Instead, it has dragged the country into a bloody desert quagmire. While the homeland tears itself apart, 6 dead American sailors, 800 dead Iranians, a fractured political base, an assassination attempt that nearly decapitated the executive branch. This is the anatomy of a collapsing superpower. The United States military is the most lethal fighting force in human history. But a sword is only as strong as the arm that swings it. Right now, that arm is paralyzed by domestic censorship, political violence, and institutional rot. You have to ask yourself a critical question. If the Secret Service cannot secure a hotel perimeter in Washington, how can the Navy secure the Strait of Hormuz? If the Department of Justice cannot maintain internal stability, how can the Pentagon maintain global hegemony? These are not isolated events. The Cole Thomas Allen shooting, the Melania Trump media feud, the Pam Bondi firing, the artificial intelligence surveillance dragnet, the Middle East truce violations. They are all symptoms of the exact same disease, a terminal lack of national cohesion. The next 72 hours will determine the fate of the American Republic. Will the administration double down on censorship and military escalation? Or will the MAGA revolt force a radical change in strategy? One thing is absolutely certain. The world is watching, and our enemies are waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What they do next will shock you. Behind closed doors in Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party has already convened an emergency session of the Politburo Standing Committee. Satellite imagery confirms that the People's Liberation Army is accelerating its massing of amphibious assault vehicles along the Fujian coast, directly opposite Taiwan. They recognize that the United States military is paralyzed by a commander-in-chief facing an unprecedented domestic uprising. The Pacific Fleet, once the undisputed guarantor of global maritime security, is now receiving conflicting directives from a fractured Pentagon. If the American populace is entirely consumed by internal political warfare, the deterrent umbrella that has protected democratic allies for decades simply evaporates overnight. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Russian intelligence operatives are working overtime to amplify the chaos. Cyber warfare divisions are actively deploying sophisticated bot networks across alternative social media platforms, attempting to inject disinformation that could spark physical violence between rival political factions. Their goal is not merely to influence an election, but to permanently fracture the constitutional republic. By pouring gasoline on the burning embers of American cultural divisions, adversaries hope to trigger a cascading failure of federal authority. In Tehran, the regime is seizing this window of opportunity to accelerate uranium enrichment, calculating that Washington is far too distracted to notice. The financial markets are already pricing in the apocalypse. Wall Street executives, who previously dismissed the populist movement as a temporary nuisance, are now panicking as supply chains begin to freeze. Truckers, farmers, and blue-collar workers across the heartland are threatening a massive coordinated strike. If the supply chains halt, grocery store shelves in major metropolitan areas will be empty within 3 days. The resulting urban panic would force governors to deploy the National Guard, further straining a military apparatus that is already stretched to the breaking point. The elite class completely underestimated the leverage of the working man. Inside the Beltway, the desperation is palpable. Mainstream media outlets are receiving coordinated talking points directly from intelligence agencies. attempting to frame the grassroots rebellion as a coordinated domestic terrorism campaign. Anchors look directly into the camera, warning citizens that their neighbors might be radicalized extremists. But the narrative is failing. Independent journalists are broadcasting raw, unfiltered footage of peaceful, patriotic Americans simply demanding accountability from a bloated bureaucracy. The censorship industrial complex is working at maximum capacity, throttling search results and deplatforming prominent dissident voices. But the digital dam is breaking. The truth is finally leaking out everywhere. Whistleblowers are emerging from the shadows. High-ranking officials within the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are quietly leaking explosive documents to independent media. These documents reveal a terrifying blueprint for martial law, detailing plans to freeze bank accounts, suspend habeas corpus, and federalize local police departments under the guise of national security. The sheer audacity of these contingency plans has shocked even the most cynical political observers. It proves what the MAGA base has suspected for years. The establishment would rather destroy the country than relinquish their iron grip on the levers of absolute power. As the 72-hour countdown continues, the pressure on conservative leadership reaches a boiling point. State legislatures in red states are drafting emergency articles of nullification, preparing to openly defy federal mandates. Governors are placing their state guards on high alert, creating a tense standoff between state and federal authorities not seen since the 19th century. The constitutional crisis is no longer theoretical. It is playing out in real time on the steps of capitals across the nation. Citizens are gathering by the millions, wrapping themselves in the American flag, singing the national anthem, and refusing to back down. The globalist institutions are terrified. The World Economic Forum and the United Nations are issuing frantic press releases, condemning the populist uprising as a threat to the liberal international order. They understand that if the American people successfully reclaim their sovereignty, the entire house of cards built on international treaties, climate mandates, and digital currency surveillance will collapse. The United States is the linchpin of their global architecture. Without a compliant administration in Washington, their utopian vision of a borderless, centrally managed world is dead on arrival. This is why the international pressure to crush the rebellion is so intense. Yet the resolve of the American patriot remains unbroken. Veterans are organizing neighborhood watch programs, ensuring that any false flag operations designed to incite violence are immediately documented and exposed. Tech innovators aligned with the movement have launched decentralized communication networks that cannot be shut down by Silicon Valley monopolies. This parallel economy is rapidly gaining traction, allowing citizens to bypass the traditional financial system entirely. Barter networks, local agricultural co-ops, and precious metal exchanges are surging in popularity as Americans prepare for the possibility of a prolonged economic siege orchestrated by a vindictive and cornered political elite class. The military brass is facing an impossible dilemma. Mid-level officers and enlisted personnel are quietly expressing their refusal to comply with any unconstitutional orders directed against American citizens. The Pentagon is painfully aware that a significant percentage of their most capable warfighters hail from the very communities currently under attack by the administration's rhetoric. Any attempt to use active duty troops to quell political dissent would likely result in mass mutinies and a catastrophic fracturing of the armed forces. The generals must choose between their loyalty to a corrupt political establishment and their sacred oath to defend the United States Constitution. As the clock ticks down, a massive rally is scheduled to take place in the heart of the nation's capital. Millions of citizens are descending upon Washington, not with weapons, but with copies of the Constitution and an unyielding demand for liberty. The administration has erected miles of steel fencing, deployed riot police, and saturated the airspace with surveillance drones. The visual contrast is stark. A government barricading itself against the very people it claims to represent. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a knife. One wrong move, one spark, could ignite a historical powder keg. The next chapter of history will not be written by politicians, bureaucrats, or foreign dictators. It will be written by ordinary Americans who decided they had finally suffered enough. When the dust settles, the world will know whether the great experiment in human self-governance endures or perishes forever. The storm is no longer approaching. The storm has officially arrived. Brace yourselves for the ultimate battle for freedom's survival.